Today, I'd like to talk about stress and the impact it has on our bodies and our brains. Stress is a generic term that we all throw around to describe scenarios or feelings that make us feel less than optimal. Over the past year, I'm certain that you have endured stress in one form or fashion. While many people have their philosophies of what stress is and how it affects you, I'd like to shed a little light on the basics to help us better understand what is actually happening during times of stress. While we often interpret and process physical stress differently than emotional or psychological stress, our bodies for the most part see them as one and the same. It's the amount of time that we experience stress that we want to focus on here. And yes, of course, you can have both types of stress at the same time. In this episode, we'll briefly discuss stress and how it is both good and bad for us, and how new fields of medicine and science are converging into an exciting new area of focus in neuroscience, psychology, and immunology. Yes, it's true. The chemicals and signals that circulate throughout our bodies during times of both physical and emotional stress are the same. But it's not necessarily the badness of those stress hormones in our body that is harmful. In fact, our body needs stress to survive. Our bodies and brains were built to regulate those stress levels. Stress is a process or a sequence of events with checks and balances. To become stressed, we can worry, exercise, get sick, or injure ourselves. You may think of those activities as all completely independent, but your body does not. In each scenario, there are key hormones that are activated and circulated. In turn, a cascade of events is set off that have both short and long-term consequences. Think of stress as water held in a dam. The flow can be increased or decreased, started or stopped. Now think of an engineer controlling those floodgates. That engineer is our brain, and the dam is the organ that makes stress hormone. When working properly, the engineer, the dam, and the water all work in concert in an ongoing dance to constantly regulate the amount, quality, and timing of the water flowing past the dam. Now let's think about one of the most well-known and ubiquitous stress hormones, cortisol. It exists in all of us, and it is vital to our survival. The body's immune system uses cortisol as a signal to combat and induce certain processes, and it's regulated through constant communication between the brain and other organs throughout your body. The HPA, otherwise known as the hypothalamic pituitary axis, as well as the adrenal system, have long been taught in medical schools and undergraduate programs alike as the centers involved in regulating hormones. The hypothalamus and the pituitary collectively form the majority of the brain's input and output when it comes to immune responses and stress regulation. The adrenal glands and other associated organs are classically taught as the end organs that actually produce said hormones. As you can imagine, our bodies are not as simple as that. The brain has many areas which send and receive information to the hypothalamus and pituitary. I'll use another analogy to attempt to describe the way our brains communicate through our HPA axis with the rest of our bodies. Think of the pituitary as a fighter pilot in a warplane, and the hypothalamus as the command center on the ground telling the plane what to do. On top of this, there are many different sources of input to that pilot. There's radar, there's GPS, there's radio transmissions, there's weather to contend with and interpret. There's fuel and pressure gauges which are constantly being interpreted by that pilot. All of the input stimuli are coming to the pilot, and the pilot uses all of this information to make the decision about when to fire his or her weapon and how many times to fire and when to stop. Which weapon should be used, the machine gun, a missile, a bomb? Conversely, the pilot may decide not to fire that weapon at all if the threat is neutralized or if his airplane fails him. Now think of the weapon that pilot fired and how much data input ultimately made it into that cockpit and in between that pilot's ears to get him or her to pull that trigger. The hormone coming from the adrenal gland is that missile. It is simply the end result of so many behind-the-scenes processes. Instead of a missile, the pilot may have elected to drop a bomb or fire his machine gun, or the pilot could have not fired at all. On the other hand, if the threat was neutralized but the plane still dropped the bomb, of course you can expect to have damage done by that bomb. Now think of your body as taking that blast from that weapon and absorbing that collateral damage. Instead of a heap of dirt, that damages occur into your body. Here is a simplified real-life immunologic scenario. Macrophages are cells in your body that eat intruders such as bacteria or viruses. Think of them like Pac-Man in your blood vessels. The intruder gets into your blood and Pac-Man eats the intruder. Simple. End of story. The macrophage took care of the threat by eating that invading microorganism. So there's really no need for an inflammatory response throughout your body. It is when that system fails to regulate itself that we start noticing the clinical effects of stress. Imagine a home invasion where an intruder breaks in and is immediately met by an angry barking dog, a loud alarm system, a homeowner with a gun, and a police squad shows up. These are all measures put in place to do one thing. Now, after the intruder is neutralized, what if you couldn't get your alarm to stop? What if your dog wouldn't let go of the intruder's leg despite him being in handcuffs? The checks and balances are no longer functioning as intended. Just like with the military aircraft, as well as with hydraulic dams and rivers, home intruders, and Pac-Man in your blood, the responses tended to be graded, gradual, and calculated. An error in either direction has immeasurable consequences beyond the immediate outcome. There is an emerging field of medicine called Psychoneuroimmunology. We're uniquely poised to study this novel field because of the situation that the coronavirus has put us in. Think about it. How many people have been locked up in their homes for months, stressed out about health, jobs, politics, you name it? So much so that maybe one day, who knows, the words COVID or 2020 will be synonymous with the concept of stress. The effect on population health extends way beyond the epidemiology of virology and infectious diseases. As we just established, the immune system isn't just a body system. It is intricately intertwined with the brain, and it is completely dependent on the way the brain perceives and recognizes stress, both physical, emotional, and mental.